Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is Creston, and I'm your host, more or less, here at the seminar, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, entitled Thinking, a Dangerous Act. This is our fourth session. Last week we had a lecture from Dejan Lukic, who talked about the infinite and in relationship to thinking and its dangers. Caution, caution. It's a real pleasure for us and for me, especially today, to introduce a dear friend of mine who is also an accomplished artist and philosopher. I had the great opportunity of sitting in on Francisco Gonzalez Castro's PhD defense in Santiago, Chile, a year and a half ago. Francisco Gonzalez Castro is an artist and philosopher. He is an assistant professor of philosophy and the arts and director of the Global Center for Advanced Studies South American Collective based in Santiago, Chile. He's an artist and a curator, a researcher. And as an artist, one of the things that is extraordinary about Pancho, which is the nickname of Francisco Gonzalez Castro, one of the most extraordinary things is how he enacts art as a philosophical act and deterritorializes the notion that theory and action are separated. He has worked in various collectives and has done some work also abroad here in Europe, in Sweden, Germany, and Spain, and France. Hopefully he'll be coming to our Summer Institute, cross your fingers, this year. In addition, he has done various projects as a curator, focusing on establishing relationship between the artists of different generations around issues of art and society. In his work and research, he approaches social and political themes around the power and reflections of the usefulness of art as an element of concrete change in society, and within the contingency, positioning the concept of the political artistic, which is a concept that Francisco is developing in his upcoming book. He's also participating in a book that GCAS is going to be publishing with Columbia University Press that features others such as Noam Chomsky, Yanis Varoufakis, our honorary president, Louis Gordon, Antonio Negri, and others. So it is a great joy for me to introduce to you today our guest speaker, Session 4, Thinking, a Dangerous Act. Join with me in welcoming Francisco Gonzalez Castro.
Thank you for the introduction, Creston. Thanks a lot. There is, since a long time that I don't speak English, I basically gonna read some things to support me because I'm really out of practice. So, okay, basically what I want to share to do with you today are the things that I thought when Creston invited me to participate in this seminar. This has to do with several things, but most of the things that I'm going to say, there's just throw ideas, most to provoke, because at the time we cannot enter in deep in each idea. So this first thought had to do with the title itself of the seminar and with thinking about what is really dangerous for the system and what is that step that makes a critical thought that all people have in everyday life with little things or with the structure of the system. What is that step from become a real danger for the thinking? And of course, how I relate this with the artistic practice. So saying that, in order to share these ideas that came to me and to make more easy to understand, it seems for me necessary to position my place of enunciation from where I speak. This may seem trivial, But for me, it's really necessary to be transparent from where I say what I say. So for one hand, I start from the premise that the separation between theory and practice, it's in fact a fiction. Theory is a practice, since has thinking. So that's a ground that I always stand. There is no such thing as a strict separation between theory and practice. And also always speaks from kind of critique, a distance, sometimes an opposition in front of the category of art, like big art and its systems, since from my perspective and from others, this is in fact a capitalistic and Western category that is different from the artistic practice that happen in all cultures. The system of art, for me, subtract the potential from change from the artistic practice, putting in a museum or in the with this concept of the autonomy of art and all that. It's for me a strategy of capitalism. And the other thing is critical thinking and creation, for me, are completely linked. And with that thought in mind, I will return at the end. And finally, in this place of enunciation, even if I don't refer directly, most of the things that I thought and my position in front of certain subjects are crossed by different thinking, like Nietzsche, Deleuze, Guattari, Foucault, Marx, and many others. And for my friends and colleagues here in Chile, I always been crossed by them, so I have to mention. Okay, saying that, one of the questions that I asked myself is how artistic practice can embody and not represent, embody the danger of a radically different thought to change our reality. And in order to give an approximation of this, I would like to present 3 examples of experience of which I was part, and that I think that they can provide some light on that question. So, Creston, can you put the first video, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen.
Okay.
And now, okay. And video number 1. This is the right video, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just move these things out of the way. And where do you want me to start playing it?
Just like that, in that moment. Yeah.
Acá se reivindica el
Can you
movimiento de los
load the
ministros de
audio a little bit?
como un ejemplo auténticamente popular, surgido desde las entrañas mismas del pueblo.
A little more.
Condiciones llenas de injusticia, arbitrariedades.
Is that good?
There, yeah. Can you hear me right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I'm gonna leave it there, just so you can see. This first example has to do with the action that is that video, tribute to the anti-coup Marines. The first thing to review for this example is to tell the story about these Marines. For those who don't know, on September 11 of 1973, a coup d'etat took place in Chile, organized by the military, different businessmen, and the government of the United States, which overthrew the democratic elected socialist government of Salvador Allende. These Marines, the 5 that you see there and much more others, they were low rank in the Marine. The highest rank of the group was a sergeant. And they, in these years, in the 70 to 73, they analyzed their reality in the Navy and the reality of the country. They start to think by themselves. In fact, many were influenced by one book in particular, The Revolution of the Squad, that is this book, not the original, but this book, that tell the story of a takeover of the Navy by Marines to press for social change in the 1930s. The point is that this Marine knew that the coup d'etat will take place months, so they warned the authorities, and they were not here. They offered them to some groups, like revolutionary groups of the moment, to take all the warships, and they were not here again. And finally, they decided to take the ships by themselves and stop the coup d'etat before it happened. But in August, they were arrested. And from that moment, they were tortured and spent like 8 to 10 years in prison. So, in fact, the dictatorship in Chile started with them. And this story, for me, shows the danger of thinking, a very real danger that can change the course of history. And these Marines, who were about 20 years old in that moment, were arrested because they think. They realized the injustice and what was coming, and they did something about it. And many pay with their lives for thinking and acting critically. So when, as a collective with Charco, we know this story, we were deeply interpelled by it. So we contact some of these Marines, and we start to work together, and did what you can see in the video. A tribute to this Marine who opposed the coup before it happened. And to do this, we replicate the tributes that the Navy does from their heroes, and we tell their story, which has been erased from the official story in Chile. From this action, in addition, we send invitation to all the authorities, political parties, and the different military forces, the Navy, the Army, the aviation, and all. And we receive actually the response from the Almirant of the Navy. Obviously, he is not going to attend to the event because he had previous meetings or something like that. The important thing about this action for me is that it creates a reality. It doesn't represent it. It changed the life of several of us, and also the Marine, because they wait for most of 14 years to have a recognition. So for them, this was real. And this started with the critical thinking back in the 70s, which became an action which was brutally repressed, and which years later led to this tribute, which was real, as I say. It started in the beginning from an artistic practice, but for them and us, it was a real tribute. So that's the first example. Can you put the second video, please, Preston?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Pancho, do you want me to mute this one, or do you want me to play it at a low volume? Because it's hard to hear you with the audio.
Just mute.
Okay, so I'm going to mute it. Play it. Here we go.
Thank you. So this second example I wish to show is the action that was made by the feminist collective NIRE. NIRE is a group of young women living in Curarehue, a city in the south of Chile, and in territory of the Mapuche people. That is one of the indigenous groups that still live and has a voice in Chile. So during their lives, the members of the group have experienced all the systematic violence from different places. This led them to confront this problem and develop a critical thinking against the history and its institution. Located in the violence of the Chilean state against the Mapuche people, in the violence against women from the men and the Mapuche culture itself, and in the violence of the church against the Mapuche people and the women. So to address these problems, what Nire did to move from critical thinking to critical action consisted of playing Palin, that it's a traditional Mapuche game that in its origins, it was the way of dealing with a conflict. So instead to go to war, they play Palin. And now, from all the colonialism that the Mapuche people suffered during centuries, this play now it's only playing by men. So what they did was take this complex game and go inside of the main church of Curarewe and play inside, and then in the street. They don't ask permission to anybody, but with this action, they want to claim concretely the place that corresponds them to woman, as Mapuche, and against all these institutions, but going to the place itself, not like representing something from the distance of the gallery of the museum or anything. So from this example, when thinking appears, there should be, for me, a direct questioning of the institution. Has it happening in this case, and in front and inside the institution, not like with the safe distance? So then you can see how they play on the street and stop the traffic and all that happen with this kind of intervention. And they use the kind of the traditional outfit of the game that, as I said, is used only by men. So can you put the third video, Creston, please?
Yes, I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
Extraordinary. Okay.
Thank you. So this last case I want to present is the action Layers of Disappearance 1002 of 7,000. And this action is related to the situation of migrants in the US-Mexico border. I don't think it's necessary to go in detail about what is happening in that border, just to point out that it's an enormous disaster which an entire system kills migrants, and it's designed for that. Not many different from the dictator here in Chile, but more in the legal way. But it's the same. People die in almost the same way. So, for these different reasons, I was really close involved with this problem, which challenged me and Lucy to do something about it. And here, the thinking appear has a question of what to do with that challenge that is not just a representation. So we start to think how to enter into the problem, how to make it embody the problem in us, not like take the safe distance of representation against a problem and use fancy metaphors and references to give account of that. So what we decided to do was basically go to the place where the body of a dead migrant was found, and that is that place, and there lie down once for each body found. That is 7,000 to the date that we did the action. If we achieve this objective, it would be like a tribute to the fallen one. But if not, we would reach the limit of our forces, approaching even like a little tiny to what the migrant feels when he can continue walking. When he decides to, I'm gonna stop walking, I have to sleep and die. So the action, we didn't get the objective of 7,000 times because it's the desert, the sun, and it's really, really hard. So we did only 1,002 times, about 3 hours and a half, till we reached that point when you can continue, because if you continue, you die. So it's more about trying to understand what a migrant felt instead of representing that. And from this, you can do other things because you are in that dangerous place that the migrant, it's also when he crossed the border, and you have a different understanding of the situation. So here appears to me that thinking, critical thinking, must put one's own life at risk in a way. I'm not saying that all people should think in death, but it must have a radicality in which to create forms of connection with others that the system prevented happen. How you connect with other people in a way that can escape the system. So be able of understanding your own flesh, what a migrant feels, it's really different to read the news, to understand from this safe distance the problem. It puts you in real danger. So after this example, some thoughts that emerge from the things that I say, and what I like to close with are three. On the one hand, representation for me has a structure, this structure of art, and also has a structure in general. For example, the representation in politics when you vote for someone who eventually will represent you. It's limited and it's simple. It's really a close structure with clearly sustain the system itself. And it's the reason for me, or one of the main reasons, why the system of art and its category play this game of representation, because subtract all the potential of the artistic practice that could happen in the social life in a collective way and in infinite other ways that in the museum or in the gallery or in any other way besides life itself. So for one hand, my critique goes against representation, and on the other, to be dangerous, thinking must create structures that modify the reality and at the same time has to be modified by the reality itself. It has to be a process that doesn't separate both spheres. Also, for me, it must be collective and plural to be different from the capitalistic system, and it must be intempestive and embodied itself as an event. It can stay in the head. It has to be embodied in different ways in the reality. So in this sense, until now, my bet, and one that I recognize in others, is not only my thinking, it's for a political artistic practice. political and artistic in one word, like one concept, not separate. And for me, political artistic practice is a practice that overlaps the political and the artistic practice. Not like in the limit like political art or all these words and concepts that the system of art uses. Instead, is overlapping, like create a new field of that where I take from politics the creation of reality from the event and the collective, and from art the capacity of produce its own regulation and its own production with mobile limits, and whose supports are the bodies, which in fact are the works, and whose powers lies in affirming and creating the reality, not continue working in a dialectic of opposition, like I oppose the system, so I try to gain the power and all that. Instead, go in a different way. And the power for me of these practices is that they eventually produce the political artistic effect, which are constituted from different things. First, they are concretized in individuals and not in general abstraction, such as mass and other forms of referring the human group. It happened in the people. They happen in and are the doing itself. There is no such things as a differentiation in the product and the process. It's all part of the same line. They construct the reality from a multiple collective creation, like where individuals actually create and not only participate in an artwork that set up a structure that it doesn't have the capacity of change by the people. Instead, they create the structure in a collective way and work different from the logics of the market. You can capitalize these practices. They occur, as I say, in the artist has singularity that creates and affirms its reality. And I don't mean that all people have to study art, but someone that creates something different that it's given by the system, it's in fact an artist. And creating the way of create new structures, new ways of related, not create some painting to contemplate in your living room. This has to be, for me, motivated by desire and not by interesting. That in the art world happens a lot. And these effects are the creation of one as a person and the immediate world in which you live. So it's always approaching in a micropolitical way. No, because if you enter in the same discourse of this big revolution, you have to aspire to a big power, and that's perpetuate the system over and over again. And history has told us a lot of that. So that's the thing that I keep in my mind with the invitation to Creston. So thank you for listening. And that's it. I don't know if you have any comment or question or whatever.
Thank you, Pancho. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Well, that's wow. That's really powerful examples, and thank you very much for the talk. Even if you smoke like a smokestack lightning.
Yes. I love cigarettes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any questions that you have in mind that you would like to pose to Pancho, our speaker? What I liked about your intervention in the seminar is that the first time we met, the first session, we talked about like what is thinking, its nature. The second time we talked about the reproduction of thinking and the means by which that can happen. The third time was last week, which is Dayon talking about the infinite, who is a very eloquent speaker, very gifted. But I like the contrast between last week and this week in the sense that, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. In the sense that last week we were talking, he had some examples about the infinite, and we were talking about this a little earlier, Pancho.
Mm-hmm.
But in those examples, in contrast to what you've demonstrated today, is that there's a kind of living thinking, thinking as living. And I liked how, could you repeat what you were saying about the transformation of reality and reality transforming the art or something? What was that expression or that intervention that you had there? That was really, really.
Remember where I put it.
Yeah, but I really like that. Anna, did you want to come on?
Well, what comes to what I wrote down was, I think you said something about not thinking has to not just represent a problem, but embody a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then following that, it's kind of, you said something like, how does the problem sit in us? Which I also found fascinating. Is that the point you were thinking of, Kristen?
Yeah, yes, that's right. Thank you, Anna, for bringing that up. Yeah. What?
Yeah, because the difference that I saw with the lecture of Dijan, that I found it fascinating, but my problem with that is still it's a reflection on an artwork, and the thing that it shocks me in a good way, is that you talk about the infinite from a steady image that it's close, it's already done. So how the problem of the infinite, how Dijan put it, like in perpetual construction, can be in fact not took it from a representation of that, but instead like how you live that perpetual construction, not just in art. That's my problem with that category itself, because it's not, that category is not just the artwork, it's the whole system that support that, with the museums, the gallerias, the philosophers, the critics, the dealers, and all that limit a product. So how we live that that thought of art as a product separate from the process. And why is that category a capitalistic category? It's because it born at the same time that the first systematic banks in Italy. It's not like random that the Renaissance and the concept of artist, artwork appear at the same time that the modern bank. But it's different in all other cultures that are not the Occidental Western culture, because artistic practice, it always happens. It occurs in the real life, and it's not separate from the reality. And we are really, in a way, fucked by the whole art history, because I don't know, what's that thing about the Egyptian art? and you look a book of art history and you have the pyramids. The pyramids were not art. There are not that conception of one man designing a building and it's a great architect and it's supported by itself, by an autonomy and blah, blah, blah. That's not the way it was. But this whole system of art teaches that all cultures have art, but in fact they don't. It's a strategy for me to take the critical potential of this practice that what they do for me is embody critical thinking, putting in a production that goes in the same direction of social change, and the social change are the support of these productions. So that's my problem in a way with the reflection of the young, that the infinite is seen in a work, in an image. But how we can see that in the reality, how we can see that in the social process of different revolutions. And what happened with that revolutions is that that process of continued development, that it's the infinity, eventually aspire to a power that limits the process. You have to reach the power you have to reach the presidency of any government, and that put a limit to your own development. So that's, I don't know, a series of problems that are in my head that I think that artistic practice separate from the art market and all that, maybe have some guidelines to develop different kind of process. Even with the word, with books, I don't know, I think in Nietzsche, Artaud, all people that you can say it's only poetry or only philosophy. They don't care about these categories. And the power of that, for me, it seems, for example, in these Marines that read a book about a takeover of the Navy 50 years before and say we can do that. So, I don't know. I think there is a power there to actually change things in a small scale, not like take over and stuff like that, that reproducing the same thing. Oh, that's the letter of response of the Navy, that they don't go to the tribute to the anti-coup Marines.
Could you read that or translate that for us?
Okay, Mr. Francisco Gonzalez, in relation to your invitation effected through the Office of Informations and blah, blah, blah of the Navy of Chile, number blah, 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 with the night of August of 2018, where you invite the Mr. Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, Almirant Don Julio Leiva Molina, to an act of tribute to the Marines encarcelated and tortures that oppose openly to the coup d'etat in 1973. I inform to you that sadly, for previous committees and meetings agended with previously to this invitation that contemplate the presence of the totality of the high commanders of the Navy, it is impossible to assist to the tribute titled Tribute to the Marines Anti-Coup Marines, effective the day Saturday, 18th of August of the present year. We thank you for your invitation. Sincerely yours, Captain of the Navy, Chief of Department or Coordination, blah, 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 blah. Which is interesting for me of this letter. It's an official document that even in the mention, they recognize these Marines. And it didn't happen before in history, because in other military forces, like in the aviation, they have done different things in the way of try to amend some of the things that they did with their own people. But in the Navy, no. No, they don't do anything because, in fact, the Navy is the main group that was behind the idea of the coup d'etat. So they don't gave the hand to twist by any means, but in this letter it's like they pass. Like, I don't know if they think that way, but for us was important.
That is amazing because you have a record of the Navy for the first time in history in Chile recognizing that, well, and recognizing your event in which you're recognizing people who were never recognized because they were true Chileans. Actually, they were real patriots to Chile precisely because they heard of a coup d'etat was about to happen, and they informed their superior officers, which is what you're supposed to do to protect your country. And what did they get in exchange? Torture and imprisonment. Wow.
Yeah, and actually it was really hard for them because even the left, the traditional left, and still now, because for right, they are like a pain in the ass, but for the left, it's a shame because they can't say if they recognize them, the official history, that they have no idea of the coup. So they weren't prepared and blah, 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 but they did. So even the left don't recognize these Marines. So it's really hard for them because even when they were in prison in August, Allende itself go to public and say that these were only men of extreme left, so the Navy was right to take him to jail and blah, 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 trying to maintain the order. So the same guy that they were trying to protect condemned them. So it was really hard for them, and for that reason, that this performance, it's not just an artwork, it's life for them. It started from art and these strategies, but it was real. And actually in when it happened, the tribute, some people from the art world approached to us and say, but where is the art here? Where is the body? Because it's a performance encounter. So where is the body? Where you are cut yourself? Where is the blood and all that stuff? And for us, it's not matter. It doesn't matter at all. So even if they're in the art world, we are some strange people that do things that for the system has no sense, but for the people in the life, it has.
Wow. Are there other questions? And by the way, Preston just showed up. He's in Portland, Oregon, or in Oregon, not in Portland. And Preston, our time zone changed in Europe. So we're actually an hour ahead. And unfortunately, we didn't calculate that for today's meeting.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for telling me.
Okay. But in some, I'll just summarize. In some, Francisco Gonzalez Castro, our guest speaker, who is also one of our professors and the director of our center in Santiago, he's an artist philosopher, and he came to present today on thinking a dangerous act. And the way he implemented that was to show some of his own artwork and other artworks that embody a process of thinking that's a materialization of thought that challenges realities and creates as realities, resisting representations like a painting or a sculpture, but actually tweaking reality itself in a way that opens up, in a kind of Badiouian way, an event. Right, Pancho, would you say something like that?
Yeah, it's great, actually.
So and I would like to map on to what Francisco was saying here. And this is sort of one of the kind of intonations that I had. See, people are actually joining us now. So, yeah, there's Josh from Texas, Miley from Boston. Welcome those of you who have just joined us. Today was a day where our Central Europe changed the time zone. So we actually started to meet up, and Francisco just concluded his lecture today. And so I didn't see that coming. I didn't see it, and Anna pointed that out to us. So apologies for the time zone difference that disrupted our meeting today in some sense. But I do want to welcome those of you, Josh and Miley, for joining us in Boston, and Josh from, I think, Dallas, or
yes, yeah. Dallas now, back in Dallas.
Back to Dallas from Austin last week. Well, if I can once again just quickly summarize what Pancho was saying and how important it is to our seminar. Like, you know, we started talking in our seminar about thinking in and of itself, the nature of thinking. And then the second session was about Althusser, the kind of process of reproducing, how capitalism reproduces itself through the ideological state apparatus, you know, the church, the education system, and so on, religion, and the family, and so on. And we talked about how thought can reproduce itself. And then last week, Dayon was our guest lecture, in which he talked about the infinite, and the procedure of infinite thinking is disrupting. And this week, with Francisco coming in and lecturing from Santiago, he's an artist philosopher in which he creates realities of performing philosophical interventions that tweak and challenge realities and not represent those realities like in normal art as we think of, especially in kind of privileged spaces, that representing objects is itself a distancing from reality. And in that distance, you can compromise and commodify art. And someone else is joining us. And I don't want to repeat myself over and over again, but so what I really enjoyed, what you're looking at now on the screen is actually a document from the head of the Navy in Chile. And I'm actually, Pancho, I'm going to share those videos again with everybody. So daily updates, Pancho's links, and I'm going to just share those again. But does anybody who sat through the first hour have any questions?
I would like to ask a question, if that's okay.
Yes, please do, by all means.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated your framing of artistic practice as a sort of living thinking or a living type of thought, and the meta critique of reason that's not reducible to rationality or rationalism that sort of seems to inform it, it seems to me. I have a question with regards to the context of colonialism and imperialism with regards to that. Specifically, how does one... So the difference being that colonialism, it seems to me, seems to be a one-way streak, whereas imperialism is more totalizing. So it inhabits far more closed-ended possibilities than the one directionality of colonialism. To get rid or to engage in anti-imperial thinking for me seems to begin with this idea that both the colonizer and colonized are equally arrested by colonial understanding. So you don't want to reduce yourself to a revolt because it sort of replays that binary and the dialectic again. So as someone who's engaged in artistic practices, how do you sort of embody that contradiction of not being caught on both sides? Does that make sense?
Yeah, has a lot of sense. It's here it's from the main near group of friends. It's a discussion that we have a lot, because when social movement here in Chile in particular appears and start to happen, you have like